Hello, everyone. We'll give a few minutes for people to get on. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of Ask the Expert. Today, we're going to be talking about bird watching. We have with us Dr. Barney Dunning, Professor of Wildlife Ecology, Brian McGowan, who's one of our wildlife extension specialists for Purdue Extension. And we also want to give a shout out for some extra help from Dr. Jessica Outcoat. She put together some of the slides that you're going to see today. So without further ado, if you have questions, please place those in the comment section. We'll be happy to get to those throughout the broadcast today. And I'm going to pass it off to Brian McGowan to get us started.
So one of the questions that we get a lot is how do we start and where do we start in terms of trying to find resources and assistance to determining what birds are out there and what you're hearing and seeing on your neighborhood walks or your backyard. And so Dr. Dunning is going to talk a little bit about some of the resources out there that you can use.
Right, thanks, Brian. In a sense, we're sort of in a golden age now in terms of information. Information on how to get started in bird watching is more readily available than it ever has been. Well, during the time people have been really interested in birds. It used to be that you were really restricted to certain kinds of books like field guides in order to try to identify birds or learn more about their life history. But now there's all sorts of apps, there's all sorts of information available on the web to help you out. So Winnie, if you would go to the next slide, or Brian, whoever's got control of that. So here's just some of the apps that are available. A number of these are created by the Laboratory of Ornithology at Cornell University, which is one of the main centers of bird research here in North America. I think one of the most popular bird apps that I've seen people using is the Merlin app. This allows you to enter the birds that you're seeing and create a checklist. It then stores that information so you can get a list of all the birds you've ever seen, what we call a life list, for instance. Merlin also has a function where you can flip through pictures and try to identify the bird. You can take a photograph of a bird and Merlin will try to identify it. And it will also play a song so you can learn the song. Personally, I use the Sibley Guide app. What's listed here is Sibley Birds 2nd edition, because the Sibley Guide to Birds is the field guide that I like to carry around. So I just find it convenient to have the same resource on my phone as is in the book, the same illustrations, etc. The Sibley Guide also has range maps. It has, like Merlin does, it has a function so you can listen to birds songs and calls. So I find that to be a very useful app. It's a little pricier than some of the others, cost like $25. You'll see eBird listed here. eBird is a collaborative work by citizen science to store all of the checklists that people see of birds on a given day, and that data then becomes available to science. eBird also allows you to have your own lists, all the birds you've seen in one state, all the birds you've seen in 1 year, your total life list, that sort of thing. And the Merlin app actually links to eBird. So eBird is a very, very useful tool for many other people. There are several other sources. The Audubon bird guide is very cheap. I have some good birding friends in the area who say that it's not quite the best. So you sort of get what you pay for. If you want to go to the next slide. If you want a website to search for information about birds, the easiest one to remember is just All About Birds. www.allaboutbirds.org is the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology webpage. It has access to information on different kinds of boxes and feeders that you can make for birds. It's got information about how to get started in birding, and it also has a separate page with information about each species found in North America, such as this page for the Baltimore Orioles. So that's a really useful, quick go-to source for information about our birds.
Great. Thanks, Barney. So I'm kind of not a hardcore birder, as you say, but I've had experience over the years, and certainly working with folks who are. And one thing I notice is that a lot of folks have nice equipment. And so if you've got a pair of binoculars, that always helps. But if you don't, you can always kind of explore and just observe birds in your yard and kind of see where they go. And you can actually make some pretty neat discoveries. One thing I've kind of found over the years is you can find birds nesting in peculiar places. Before we came on live, I was talking to Wendy and Barney about this pair of Carolina wrens who are nesting in my garage in a tool belt. And so there's a little gap under the door, and they crawl under there like mice and jump up there in the tool belt. And so they got the nest all built, and they haven't laid any eggs yet, but that'll probably be soon coming. This was a house finch years ago in a hanging plant. I just took it down to take the picture and put it back up. Being careful to water in the future. That's my daughter Claire years and years ago. This was kind of neat. So prothonotary warblers are a small warbler, and they nest in cavities, typically in areas where there's water. And so my parents live in Western Kentucky, and years ago my dad threw a hat down on the porch, and it was folded over in a way that this pair of prothonotary warblers thought it'd be good to lay some eggs in there and make, have young. And so this was kind of a pictures taken a couple days apart when I was down there visiting. And sure enough, this 5 young actually successfully fled. So it's kind of neat. You never know what you're going to find out there. I will kind of remind folks that most birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so it's actually nests and the parts of birds and everything are protected. So even a nest that's under disuse, you can't keep and put on a shelf for decoration, things like that. If it's in a place where you want to move it because it's unsightly or something like that, you can do that as long as it's in obvious disuse. Otherwise, once they start building it and things, you got to kind of just let them go. So I'm going to kick it back over to Wendy. I don't know if we have any questions.
Yes, thank you. Brian, our first question comes in from Carol Fierick. She says, will sterilizing bird seed in the oven or microwave affect the nutrition of the seed?
I have to admit, I don't know if I've had that question before, but as far as I'm aware, quite a bit of commercial bird seed is already heat treated to prevent it from from germinating if it doesn't get eaten by the birds. People are in particular worried about what is often called thistle seed, which you put in a feeder to attract house finches and goldfinches. It's a little black seed, small enough that it often requires a specialized feeder. Otherwise, it just blows out of the feeder. That's actually not thistle. It is a composite relative to asters, that sort of thing, that's grown in India, and it's called thistle seed because it looks like the seeds of the thistle plants that are around here. They're having enough trouble with people misunderstanding that name that it's now being sold under Niger, Nyjer, instead of thistle, but it's the same thing. I know that particular source of seed is heat treated. You get a few plants that sprout up, but the vast majority of the seeds are not going to germinate. I have not seen anybody suggest that heat treating the seeds changes the nutritional content. So if that's an issue, I haven't heard anybody talking about it.
Great, thanks, Barney. One question I had, and I'm sure a lot of people have, if they're just getting started in this, as they're trying to set up their yards to attract birds, is does it matter? Can I buy the $6 bag at the big box store, or should I be spending $20 on the fruit and nut one that has a pretty picture of the cardinal that I want in my yard. Can you talk to that a little bit?
So I can talk about that. Is that okay, Brian?
Yeah,
or do you
go
want to
ahead,
take a
Barney.
shot?
Yep, absolutely. No, take it away.
So it's sort of the old maxim, you get what you pay for, all right? The cheaper mixes of birdseed that you get at the grocery store, for instance, often are filled with a whole lot of seeds that birds actually don't eat all that much. So in particular, we have relatively few of our birds that feed on cracked corn. Pheasants do, I suppose quail would, chipmunks like it, but not a lot of our cardinals and goldfinches and that sort of thing eat cracked corn. There's also a relatively big seed that's reddish in color that's called milo, M-I-L-O. And most of our birds, smaller than a dove, don't really like milo either. So if you look at a wild bird mix that you get in the grocery store and look at the list of ingredients, and if milo and cracked corn are among the most common ingredients, then that's probably not going to be a really good mix. What I tend to prefer is black oil sunflower seeds. There's also a bigger striped sunflower, but that is such a big seed, hardly anything eats it, other than, I don't know, house sparrows and squirrels. So not the striped sunflower, but black oil sunflower, white millet, which is a really small light colored seed, and our sparrows and cardinals and that sort of thing really love white millet. And then the thistle seed, which is the preferred seed for our goldfinches and house finches and that sort of thing. So I try to find a mix that has as much of the white millet and the black oil sunflower. You'll see on the slides here a bunch of different kinds of feeders and some of the different foods that you can give. A certain whole set of our forest birds just love suet, which is animal fat. You can buy them now in most stores that sell bird seed as packaged suet. It's loved by woodpeckers, nuthatches, and chickadees. Last couple of days, I've been having some orioles coming to my suet feeder and feeding on the suet there. So a really nice mix would be a thistle seed feeder and then a more general seed feeder that has especially black oil sunflower in it, and then some suet for the insect eating birds.
And one of the things that a lot of people asked about, and Brian had talked about this before when he did his hummingbird feeders talk, which I'll put a link to in the comment section, is where should those be placed? What should I be doing? If I don't have a tree, does that matter? If I do, should I be placing it in certain spots in my yard? Basically, how do I get these birds that I really want to see to come and visit?
Well, sometimes I think you got to make do with what you have. And so at a lot of like Birds Unlimited, those type of places, they'll have different poles and things and stations that you can use. So if you don't have a tree around, you can put the pole in the ground and have different things coming off of there. So, you can have different food items, just as Barney described. And so that way you're offering different things. So you don't necessarily have to have a tree. The other thing though, that is generally good. So this is, for example, with hummingbirds, is those you actually want to space apart because you can get a dominant male that just kind of keeps everybody else away from the feeders, right? And so those, you got to be cautious about spacing them apart, 10 to 12 feet. But you want to be kind of within close distance of cover, but not too close where you can have something like, for example, cats, which are a big problem with birds. And so cats, if you give them a place to hide, that could be a problem. And so kind of having them relatively open, but having some sort of cover, maybe 10 to 15 foot away is ideal, but not necessarily absolutely required, right? Because if you remember, like bird feeding, that's only one component. So birds and wild animals, they need food, they need cover, and they need water. And so if you're just concentrating on the food part without focusing on the other habitat components, you're still going to be kind of missing the boat a little bit, not getting as many species as you might if you had some good habitat close by.
One other
Barney,
point
anything
that
you want
I
to
would
add
add
there
to
in
that
terms of?
is that, yeah, sure. We have a bit of a lag here. So one problem people can have if they put out a set of feeders next to their home is having birds hit their windows or hit their house. And when that happens, if that becomes a problem, if it happens, fairly regularly, then probably your feeders are too close to the house. There are some feeders, especially some hummingbird feeders, that you can design to be right attached to the window itself. And that gives you tremendous views, especially if you have a film or one-way glass that so that you can see the birds by looking out, but the birds can't look in and see you. Birds tend not to fly into the windows if the feeders are right there on the window itself. If you have your feeders a far distance away from the window, maybe 10 feet or 12 feet or something like that, then if a predator does come, or otherwise the birds get alarmed and they leave and quickly try to get away, if the feeder is 10 to 12 feet away from the house, then they're not going to rush away from the feeder in surprise and hit the window in their attempt to try to get away. It's when the feeders are within that distance. If they're too close to the house, then a bird on the feeder has something, a cat goes by or something, it startles it and it flies away from the feeder and it hits the window, and that can kill the birds. So if you're having trouble with birds hitting your windows because of the feeders in the area, move them a little further away. They need to be either immediately on the window itself, or they need to be a good distance away. If they're in that middle distance, then you'll end up with birds hitting your windows.
Great, thanks, Barney. Good information there. We don't want any birds hitting windows and having to take injured birds to rehab facilities. So let's prevent that. We had another question come in. I'm interested in attracting purple martins, but I own a long swimming pool. Will they try to drink the chlorinated water? And if they did, would it be harmful to them?
I have never heard of martins or swallows drinking chlorinated water. Birds like that forage mostly by flying around and feeding on flying insects, when they drink, they don't come down to the ground and drink all that much. Instead, they'll just fly real low over the surface of the water and reach down and get mouthfuls of water from the surface of a pond or something like that. And I know purple martins will do that. I've never heard of people reporting that from chlorinated swimming pools or that sort of thing.
Even if they did, I'm not sure it'd really have an adverse impact on them. You think about people swimming in pools, and kids can sometimes probably drink quite a bit of the water in the pool, and it doesn't really affect them to a great degree. So I think they'd be okay there.
Great. We don't want to injure any birds. You talked a little bit about squirrels being attracted to the corn and different things like that that you might have on your feeders. Is that an issue? Should I be concerned if I have a chipmunk that's you know, or squirrels that are eating out of my bird feeders, is that going to deter the birds? But let's say I like the chipmunks and squirrels.
Well, I mean, the chipmunks really aren't going to be in the feeder. They can certainly feed on the ground, that kind of thing, but they're not any great climber, so that's not an issue. But certainly tree squirrels are always probably the number one adversary of people who have feeders. More just because they can eat a lot of the seed, and so it could become quite expensive from that. So sometimes what people do is they'll actually buy corn that's on the cob or cracked corn and try and move that away from the feeders to draw the squirrels away from the feeders to allow the birds to kind of come in, because they can definitely cause problems that way. You can exclude squirrels from feeders. It can be a challenge, especially if they are trees close by, because they're pretty acrobatic and they can make that pretty far leap. Some squirrel feeders or bird feeders tend to be squirrel proof, but they can kind of figure a way to get about that. And so that's one advantage of having feeders on a pole that's away from cover, in that it really makes it difficult for squirrels to access that stuff. And a lot of times what happens too is birds will kick out some of the seed, especially if you're providing bird seed in mixes. And so like Barney said, a black oil sunflower seed is probably the most preferred and widely used seed that you can have. And so if you've got a mix that's got some of those in there, but other things, they'll kick through the other stuff to get to the stuff that they want, and that falls to the ground. And so you can get animals feeding on it that way as well. The thing is, though, you can also have good surprise feeders. So in other words, sometimes you can get southern flying squirrels, which are nocturnal species. You can get them coming to a feeder at night. So if your feeder is close to an area where you can maybe flip on a porch light, sometimes you can do that. Another thing is sometimes you get possums that will feed in a feeder. Usually if they're doing that, you end up with getting these kind of seed wads or balls of seed husks and things in the feeder. And if you have that, that's actually indicative that possums are up in there feeding.
Barney, let's talk a little bit more about bird watching. We've talked a lot about getting birds to my yard and what am I supposed to feed them or not supposed to feed them. But can you give us some advice on just what I should be looking for as I'm looking out in my backyard? What kind of species might I be seeing? And are there good and bad species? Are there some that I want to deter from coming? And can I do that?
So good and bad are relative terms. They are personal opinions. There are some people who think that blue jays are really bad because they're dominant and aggressive birds. There are other people who love blue jays. So it's kind of a personal thing there. We like to use a picture like you see on the screen right now when we start talking about bird identification, because for a lot of beginning birders, the number one thing that they focus in on when they see a bird that they don't know and want to identify it is color. So we have two brownish or brownish gray birds here in this shot. And it makes a lot of sense. Most humans are color-oriented people, and we're used to using color as a way of identifying things. If color was the best way to identify what a bird is, though, then flamingos and cardinals would both be easy to identify if you know one, because they're both red. But a flamingo doesn't look anything like a cardinal. And so color by itself is often not the best way to start with when you're trying to identify a bird. The difference between the two birds here, like I said, they're both mostly brownish. They both have streaks on their breast. The bird on the feeder is a little bigger than the other. But if you just look at the color patterns, they both have a little bit of white in the wing. You don't get very far in identifying these birds just by looking at color. On the other hand, the bird on the feeder has a huge bill compared to the other one. The bird on the feeder is a rose-breasted grosbeak, a female grosbeak, and the name tells you it's got a really big gross beak. The other bird is a female house finch. And so what I often tell my students who are just learning how to do birding is look at shapes as well as colors, and look at, especially look at the bill. The bill tells you what the bird can do. So both of these birds have a conical bill that's used for breaking and crunching seeds. So that tells you that they're seed eaters, and there's only a relatively small group of birds here in North America that feed on seeds for a large enough part of the year that their bill is adapted to do that. Cardinals, sparrows, and finches are the primary granivores or seed-eating birds, and they have this conical seed crunching bill. Rose-breasted grosbeaks are a relative of our common everyday northern cardinals, and the house finch is a relative of our American goldfinch. So they both belong to those families. So looking at the bill is often the best way to get a start on identifying a bird. If you think about it, birds don't have fingers on their hands, so they can't do a whole lot of things that we as mammals do with our forelimbs. They can't handle their food. They can't take care of their feathers by using their forelimbs, their wings. They do all that with the bill instead. So the bill really tells you what the bird does, and that's usually a very good clue as to what group of birds it belongs to.
Thanks, Barney. Brian, you want to give us a look at what maybe we could be seeing in our yards? I know Barney alluded to that a little bit. I think some of the slides talk about some of the common species that folks might be seeing in their yards here in Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of finches and sparrows that call backyards homes. And this is a really good time of year to be looking at a lot of different birds because there's really a lot of activity out there. So we've got species who nest in this area this time of year. They're actively building nests. Many of them have already even fledged young. For example, robins have already, in a lot of parts of the state, have already produced a clutch, and they've fledged already. But you also have migrants coming through. And so just the other day, I heard a Nashville warbler and a Cape May warbler in an oak tree next door to my house there. And so you can get a lot of different things going on. But finches and sparrows certainly are really common. American goldfinch is probably the most easily, or one of the most easily identifiable birds, because they have that bright, the males have a bright yellow body and a black cap. House finches are another common species. You saw the female house finch earlier. The males have that reddish, pinkish color to them on their head and on their nape of their back. House sparrows are certainly a common species, but again, a lot of people really don't want them around because they're not native to this country. And so they used to be called English house sparrows. Now people just call them house sparrows. And the reason why that, just because they're exotic, but they actually they'll compete with some of our other native species and can cause issues with them. Just earlier this year, I have a box in my backyard, and some chickadees decided to make a home in it, and we're starting to do some nest construction there. And then I saw a house sparrow that was kind of in and out of there, and they were working on each other, that kind of stuff. And so eventually the house sparrow left, but that's why we don't really, a lot of people don't want them around. A chipping sparrow is another sparrow. It's a very small sparrow. Has an easily identifiable song. If I tried to do it right now, I probably wouldn't do it justice, but it's basically a trill, a chip, 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 trill, that kind of a thing. But they're very, very small and they're active on the ground. And so the more you kind of do this, the look of birds is really important, but certainly how they behave. And so are they on the ground? Are they up in the trees? Do they flick their tail a lot like wrens do? Those are the types of things that you kind of look for, after you kind of start looking at some of these species from that standpoint. Lots of colorful birds that you can find. Barney mentioned blue jays, which are a large, easily recognizable bird. And certainly everyone's familiar with robins and cardinals. But eastern bluebirds are ones that you sometimes can find in backyard or certainly park habitats. And so they nest, they're cavity nesters, and so you'll find those in those areas. And then orioles, which you tend to find in park, cemetery, open woodland kind of things. And so certainly some neighborhoods would kind of qualify for that. And they're one species you can find. And actually providing them slices of oranges or even nectar, like a nectar feeder, you can get orioles to come to your house that way. And apparently my dog has found a squirrel.
So some people have swear by spreading grape jelly on their orange halves when they put them out for the orioles. They absolutely insist that the orioles are much more likely to visit the orange if there's grape jelly. I haven't actually gotten a confirmation that it has to be grape jelly, but that seems to be a combination that a lot of people are using to attract orioles to their yards.
Great. You talked a little bit about, Brian, the starlings and sparrows and how people don't want those. Another species that kind of gets a bad rap, and probably justifiably so, are crows and hawks. What if I don't want those creatures in my yard? Is there anything I can do to prevent them from visiting my feeders and scaring away the other birds or small animals?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Crows are actually predators of some species, so they'll go into nests and steal eggs and things like that. Although blue jays and some other species do that as well. So that's why some people really don't like them around. And then hawks, obviously, a lot of times in neighborhoods, especially, you can have a Cooper's hawk. That's probably the most common kind of neighborhood hawk that you get. Red tails are more of an open land species. You find those out more in rural areas, but Cooper's hawks are very adept to catching birds. And so every now and then in my backyard, I'll see like a puff of feathers. Typically they were from a mourning dove that we have Cooper's hawks in our area. That's what it's from. So with the Cooper's hawks, like all those species are protected. So almost every single species you can think of, with the exception of, house sparrows, starlings, and pigeons, are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so you can't do anything. It's legal to harass them. And so if you don't want hawks and things around, I suppose you can, go out there and try and shoo it away, have frightening devices, those types of things. But they're actually protected. And the thing that I tell people too is that while for us, we don't like things like killing our birds and that kind of a thing, but predation is a ecological event. It's natural. It's necessary. And so some predation is actually desirable if you think about it from kind of maintaining the balance of things. If you don't want that, or you may want to give the songbirds a fighting chance, is I would go back to the habitat thing. So if you can provide good cover and good habitat in your yard and your property, then most professionals would say that gives them kind of a fighting chance and you balance things out. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but everything's got to roll out there and things will happen sometimes, not the way we would particularly like, but that's kind of nature. And so that's the exciting part too. You don't really know what's going to happen.
Barney, anything you want to add on that? Or also another question that we had, you mentioned nest boxes and things like that. Is that something people should be putting out or anything like that to assist maybe some of these birds that are migrating through the area?
So the only thing I would add to what Brian said about hawks and crows and having them attracted to your yard, I live in the northern part of Tippecanoe County in a semi-farm area. I see crows all the time. I have never had a crow at my bird feeders. It really depends upon the food that you put out for them. If I was putting out, especially uncracked corn, which is sold in some of the stores to attract deer, for instance, or the mixes that have a lot of the big seeds, or especially if I'm putting out leftovers, essentially food waste that I'm not eating, like breadcrumbs and things like that, I would be much more likely to get crows than I do with the mix of seeds that I'm putting out. So I think playing around with the kinds of food that you provide can help reduce the possibility of something like crows coming in. Another group of birds that people don't like are cowbirds. Cowbirds are nest parasites. They lay their eggs in other birds' nests and then make the other birds raise their young rather than doing the honorable thing of raising their own young. The people think that that's bad because of the standards we have for our species, I guess. But actually, well, anyway. There's a certain part of the spring I put out, especially white millet. I throw it on the ground for a variety of the sparrows that winter in our area. But early in the spring, the cowbirds start to return, and when I throw the seed out, the millet seed, I end up getting lots and lots of cowbirds. Well, when I see that, then I stop putting the millet seed. I might throw a little of the thistle seed on the ground instead, because the cowbirds don't seem to like that very much. So changing the kind of food that you put out is one way of trying to eliminate the less desirable species. In terms of nest boxes, there's a wide variety of different style of boxes that you can put out to attract different kinds of species. Often the most critical feature about the nest box may not be its size or its shape, but rather it's the size of the opening, the hole that the birds go in and out. If you leave a really big hole, then cowbirds can get in and parasitize the nest. If you leave a really big hole, then starlings can get in. If you have a very small hole, then maybe only chickadees or house wrens or some of our native species can use that type of nest boxes. And a site like the Cornell Labs All About Birds or the National Wildlife Federation's website has a lot of specification of how big of a hole to have for certain kinds of species. Nest boxes are typically put out for birds that are cavity nesters. There's a few styles of structures you can put out for like a robin to nest on. Robins just need, they build an open cup nest. They just need a surface to put a nest on. So most of the nest boxes are designed for birds that need cavities. If you have lots of big trees that have dead parts to them, dead branches that woodpeckers can make a hole in, there's probably a lot of nest cavities that are of natural origin that the birds could use. But if you're in a young neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of old trees and have mostly small trees in your landscaping, then adding some nest boxes can definitely attract some birds that wouldn't otherwise be able to nest on your property because the right nesting substrate, the right place to put the nest isn't present.
Awesome, great information. Wrapping up, Brian and Barney, both, I'll give you guys a chance to give some extra resources for folks. I know some of you are involved in local Audubon societies, or there might be some newsletters or some other additional resources that people who are either avid bird watchers or people who are just wanting to get started or maybe help their children as they're looking in their backyard. What suggestions do you have for them? Brian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So, there's always kind of a question about, should you feed or not feed animals, but feeding birds is generally acceptable, right? And so the neat thing about having bird feeders out there is you're really bringing animals close and you get to see them up close. And so I really kind of, if that's a good place to start. And there's the Cornell Lab, they actually have a national project, a citizen science project, Project Feeder Watch. And so I think you've got that link in the resources, and anybody who has a feeder can do this, where they can make observations and report those. And so it's a good way to kind of not only enjoy the animals in your yard, but also contribute to their conservation, because as research groups like this gather that information, they get a better handle on the status of different bird populations throughout the country and how those change over time. So it's actually a pretty good kind of a win-win for both groups.
So I can add, I am a long-term member of our local Audubon Society here in the Purdue area. That's Sycamore Audubon. And we provide a lot of activities. We've supported local teachers for a long time in classroom materials to help learn about nature and birds, but more general topics than just birds. So I would suggest going to your local Audubon society. Our society here is Sycamore Audubon, and we have a Facebook page, and the sycamoreaudubon.org should get you to our area. There's a statewide organization that's called Indiana Audubon that also has a lot of resources. It has a section of their website, indianaaudubon.org, where it lists a whole bunch of places in different parts of Indiana where you can go birding. So you could find out places to go close to your home by going to that website. As part of what we do with the local Audubon Society, I have a fairly small collection of people whose email addresses we put together in a little group called Birding on the Fly. And while the local Audubon Society has a set series of monthly meetings and weekend field trips and that sort of thing, the Birding on the Fly list is a way of just telling people when a rare bird is seen in our area, or if there's a opportunity to go birding that's not part of the organized long-term calendar, but just something that has come up recently. Then we use this little listserv to let people know about those opportunities. So all people would have to do is send me an email at jdunning@purdue.edu, and I can add them to that particular group.
Great, thank you. One final question and we'll wrap up. If you have any additional questions, feel free to put those in the comment section and we'll get to those after the fact. But for both of you, I guess to wrap up, do you have any favorite resources and or ways to start birding, especially for children?
Processing. There was a local group that was very active in providing nature-based activity here in the Lafayette area for children, but they're sort of in transition right now. I'm pretty sure that the Cornell Lab website has some specific materials. I know that there are coloring books based on birds, for instance. There's a new board game called Wingspan that seems to be really attractive to people of all ages, that can be a way for kids to learn about birds. Our local Audubon Society's field trips are open to anybody of any age and any birding abilities. We have some people who are really, really good at birding and other people who are just starting out, and we welcome everybody to participate in those functions too. So those are just some ideas.
Yeah, the other thing I can add to that is, while things might be a little different in this day and age with people staying at home and places being closed, but a lot of parks have naturalists, or they have a nature building, and so sometimes at these parks they'll do tours and things. Some of them have educational resources on birds, and so they may have a kind of a one-way window where they've got a feeder and different birds like that, and then you have pictures and things. You have to identify maybe which ones are out there. and that's certainly that. But I think with kids, I think the best thing to me is getting them outdoors. And so whether that's going on one of these Audubon field trips or going to a park with a naturalist, those are great. But even if you're, as a parent, are able to take them out and to just kind of learn together, I think there's a lot to being said there. And so downloading one of those apps, that's a really good way to do that, where you can kind of start figuring some of these things out together and learning together.
Awesome. This has been super fun and super educational, I think, for everyone involved. Again, if you have any further questions, go ahead and put those in the comment section, and Dr. Dunning and Brian will go and answer those after the fact. We'll also archive this. It'll be available on our Purdue FNR Extension YouTube channel. We'll also put it up as a Got Nature post on our FNR Extension website. Again, thank you, Barney. Thank you, Brian. Also, thank you to Dr. Jessica Outcult, who was going to join us today, but was unable to. We want to thank her for her contributions as well. And we ask that you tune in for us next week. Put it on your calendar every week at 3 o'clock throughout the rest of the summer. We will have either Ask the Expert or another Facebook Live Q&A. Next week, we will offer Improving Your Property for Fish and Wildlife with Jared Brook and Mitch Ziske. So tune in for that, put it on your calendar. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.